What's up, guys, and welcome back to WaiGuo Friends English.
Today we have a special person that we have interviewed for you guys. She was a non-native English speaker who has made it to fluency and currently coaches people in how to do interviews and how to project their voice, how to hold themselves, and she shares a lot with us today about paralanguage.
Yeah, we talk about paralanguage a lot on this channel, and here we have a person who this is primarily what she teaches, is how to do paralanguage well so you can pass an interview, so that you can get comfortable with holding the virtual and physical space well, because it's a difficult skill even for native speakers.
Yes. So you guys sit tight, grab a cup of hot tea or coffee, get comfortable because this is a long interview, but it is a wonderful one, and I hope you guys learn a lot from Ms. Tatyana.
Enjoy.
My name is Tatyana Ganeli. I'm a voice, public speaking, and interview preparation coach. I teach multicultural career seekers effective interview strategies without feeling overwhelmed, so they can improve their chances of landing a desired job in 60 days by nailing their tough interview questions with precision and confidence.
One of the things I definitely wanted to ask you about is how important paralanguage and voice is to what you are doing, like to teaching people in the corporate world and things like that. I definitely want to touch on that because so many people are focused on getting their language right and getting the words right, but 70% of your communication is not even in the vocabulary itself, right? That's what you do, that's your training. You know that from stage, from all of these things. I would definitely wanted you to be able to speak to that because that's really difficult for people to wrap their minds around.
So there are two things here. First of all, for multicultural, and I went through this, I know what it is. You're getting integrated into another culture. So how much do you want to integrate? And what's allowed, what's not? What is the protocol? There are a lot of unwritten rules. You know, when you go to the corporate environment, at least they have training, sexual harassment trainings, right? Trading trainings. Other than that, there is really not much about the conduct, what's the right thing is. And very often international people, they misinterpret to what extent you can share. Cultural thing. And I'll give you an example. I work for an international company and we were in Finland. And the general sales manager in Finland, he lived some time in Miami for a couple of years. We came to the event. It was an anniversary of their radio station. We came with our president, a very well-esteemed gentleman, class act, incredible. And then there were a couple of people from the US, and we're all standing together with this Finnish manager who used to live in Miami. And the president of the company is asking the manager, he said, "Hey, I heard you lived in Miami. What made you move back to Helsinki?" And the guy goes, "Oh, since you asked." And the president goes, "Well, you don't have to share if it's something personal." He said, "Oh, no, I feel so comfortable. My wife is such a bitch. She cheated on me. So I packed my shit and moved to Helsinki." And here we are, a very high-level event, high-level executives there. And four of us were just looking at each other. I could speak just one thing, how unpredictable. It just jumped out of me. But the president, who was, as I said, class act, he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had this experience, but I'm glad. Are you happy in Helsinki?" The guy said, "Yes, I'm very happy here." He said, "That's wonderful. I'm very happy for you. Things do work out, and you did an incredible event." And so he moved it to the event, totally didn't even look back. So people don't understand those boundaries, and they think like, "Oh, it's freedom of speech, it's freedom of speech." Well, it's not anarchy. There are still rules and regulations and protocols and people's comfort. Another thing is corporate environment. It's not my idea, I heard it somewhere, is when you go to an interview, you're assuming a role, you're getting prepared for a role. Because in life, and I'll show you example, we can laugh, right? Very funny at the party. It's a very engaging. People like it. In an office, that's highly inappropriate. If you come to an interview and you try to like, haha, right? That's inappropriate. That's off key. So understanding the difference is very important. Another thing, people very often get nervous and lose their voice during the interviews. It never happened to me because I just subconsciously I know how to at least moderate that. But I had a very close friend of mine who came to me for voice only as she was preparing for the interview. And that's how the whole idea got born. And she said every time during the interview, my throat gets dry. I can't breathe. My voice gets smaller, and then it's this cricket sound, and then I can't speak at all. And then they basically tell me, thank you very much for coming. We'll call you. And so we started working just with voice, how to transfer your voice from point A to point B where the computer is, and stay on technicality of that, on your breath of that. Because if you throw a ball, it doesn't matter where you're aiming. You will throw the ball aiming at a specific place where you try to get, right? The same thing with the voice, because it's air that pushes the sound. So just have your point A, focus on your point B, and get your voice to point B. Yes. First, you do it slowly, you practice, eventually you get in the rhythm of it, the breath is helping you, and then you'll remember just to focus on a voice. That takes the nervousness away a little bit, away from. They said, okay, instead of just talking, saying anything or doing exercises or tongue twisters, why don't we put together a self-pitch for you?
Something of substance to practice with.
And so that's how it came together out of the need, naturally. I didn't even have to research that part. And then I thought, okay, so now from there was another thing. There was a certain type of terminology we use for this specific role when we're in a corporate world. And we play roles all the time, and there is nothing fake in it, right? We're mothers, we're fathers, we are employees, we are children, we are siblings, we're friends. There are a lot of roles we play. And if you think about it, if someone calls you and you look on the phone and you see the name, the reaction to each person will be different, because with different person, you interact differently. And so it goes for the environment as well.
So when you're working with somebody, are you teaching them to identify that, or are you teaching them to tap into their natural reaction to these people or these environments? Like, how are you helping them identify the rules or identify what the appropriate body language is, if that makes sense? That's kind of a loaded question.
Yes. So when we do first introductions, they're usually unstructured, whatever people want to say about themselves. I try to structure it a little bit for groups, for example, right? So we don't waste too much time. And as people speak, then the members of the group identify what they remember about other people. Usually lower voices are not memorable. Our brain does not retain the lower voice. Why? Because when someone speaks lower, you have to make an effort, right? So your body is doing a couple of different functions, and that takes away from the attention, because now different senses are being forced a little bit, right? And narrowed a little bit to get the sound. Makes you less memorable. So it's very important. It's not even from the position of the voice, it's a position of being functional at an interview and making that memorable mark. And you're taking 50% away already. Also, if there are certain things that are just, when people speak very often, we'll look for inspiration up top, and that's okay to look there occasionally. Some people just stay there.
That is a beautiful spot on the ceiling right there.
Yeah, and there is a reason why when we call God, we wave our hands in the air, right? That's where it's coming from. But you can look, but then come back. The thing what happens, in addition to just not looking at the person, you're losing your eye contact, which is limited already because we are on screen. Also, your voice follows the energy, right? If your energy is there, your voice going there. So once again, you're not hitting that point B. And it's very uncomfortable to look at someone who is kind of living in their own world, right? The connection is broken. Very simple movements, like for example, some people fidget when they get nervous, right? That's very annoying, especially on the screen. In person, you may miss it a little bit, depending on how fidgety you are. On screen, everything is up there, right? You can see immediately. When someone is consistently moving, it dilutes attention. There is also with hand gestures, you can definitely extend the thought, but if it's too much, also it doesn't work. So it's going to be just a little bit to add 3D to your presentation, which is not a bad idea. You can move your head as well with your hand, right? But just a little bit. Another thing, listening cues. How do you listen to other people? And you just nodded, right? So you listen, you agree, you smile. Yes, I get that. Yeah, I understand. I see that, right? So this kind of not too much. I can get away with a little bit more because I can come back. Not everyone can do that, so less is more always, but understand about the engagement element. And that's basically as it's related to interviews. Obviously, the appropriate attire, like you're going to an interview, you're not going to a wedding. So tuxedo is not an appropriate choice of clothing, right? Also, yes, we're very casual today, but it's your first meeting, right? You want to make a good impression. So move from making a good impression.
Your list there is awesome. I love that because one of the things that we try to explain a lot is paralanguage, and all the things you were just talking about was paralanguage, and those things do a lot for the meaning that's given. One of the questions I had, because we are speaking in our first language, you were speaking in not your first language, is how did you figure out how to say enough, but not too much, but not too little? What I have found is, generally speaking, like in the beginner levels, speakers tend to be kind of short. They're just very informative. They say this, or they don't even answer in a complete sentence. They say, "What's your favorite hobby?" And they say basketball. Very informative. And as they go up, especially into the advanced levels, then they start to overspeak, right? When they're starting to talk about things that don't really matter, like what's your greatest skill? And they're like, well, when I was 3 years old, and it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't go back to when you were 3 years old. So how did you find a way to get your students to kind of figure out that balance of share enough information, but not too much information?
I talk a lot about structure. And I try to teach it in a educational manner where they can discover it right away. So for example, with introductions, the first class we get together, I give a little outline before the class and I ask them to prepare an introduction. And those are general things, right? Where I'm from, the education, when did I move to the US if I'm in the US or another country, Europe or whatever. What do I do now? I also ask what's your experience with interviews? What are your biggest fears? How many interviews did you have in the last 6 months or a year? So we have something common to discuss. Two ways I'm doing it because I have different type of classes. Sometimes I just let people do the introduction on their own, and then I give them the structure, and then they see the difference immediately. So that's one way to do it. So as I was talking about the first example, I give them the structure from the very beginning, and then I add a little bit about the job, about the experience. I add a little bit about the specific skills that have. And so it beefs up and it turns into a self-presentation. Another thing I do even prior to that, before we like beef it up and grow and develop it as a full-blown self-presentation, I ask people to describe themselves in 3 words. And so it never fails. And then it goes, I really like nature. I'm a very kind person. I'm a very compassionate person. And then I say, that's great. It's good to learn about you personally, but this class is preparation for interview. So we have a very specific intention that we're working with and working towards. So let's think about it. And I'm going to ask you this question again, and you take a few minutes to think, how would you describe yourself at an interview? And then it gets a lot of different words, because sometimes what happens with us multicultural people, we make a statement and then we want to make sure that you understand it. So we will translate it for you and translate it for you and translate it for you until it gets like very noisy environment of like thousands of words. And then to stop this all, I give a list. I said, you know what? I prepared the list for you. And I hope I guessed, your words, and you will find your personal words that you can relate to on my list. And it's adaptable, detailed oriented, analytical, and all the right words for the interview. I said, okay, so take a minute, choose the words, try to bring it as close to you as possible, because some of the things you named already in a long form. So let's shorten it in just 3 words. And they have to go, when I ask you, I want you to respond in staccato. Yes, 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 like adaptable, result-oriented, creative. And so we go through the whole class, and then like, how do you feel now? And everyone is blossoming and everyone is smiling. It's a practical exercise where you get the knowledge immediately through working through it.
Learning hands-on by actually doing the thing is far better than anything with theoretical knowledge through lectures or just free YouTube videos. Even like the videos are helpful, but if you watch it, you consume it, it's in one ear and out the other. You just move on to the next video or to something else. So to actually have to sit down and do it is just, you cannot get better than that. Do it with accountability in a class or with a teacher, even better, because you have to answer to somebody. And maybe you will have to do this with multiple people as well. So you really practice it. It's very, very helpful.
It's
That's
also
awesome.
self-awareness, right? Now you're
Yes.
not just someone who likes nature, but you're someone who is an adaptable professional who also loves nature.
So, as a person who basically has largely utilized the acting career of your past into how do you form an interview, a question that I often ask people that are in acting in any degree, which this is might be stepping on some toes, is what would you say to a person that says, well, I am learning how to be a different person than myself. Like, I don't talk that loud. I don't use my hands like that. I would describe myself as a naturalist or something like that. But you're telling me I have to speak louder. I have to do this. Like, I feel like I'm fake. What would you say to a person like that, that they kind of like they start to feel uncomfortable and not expressing themselves because it's a little different than they're used to?
Fair. And I heard that actually from an HR person. Actually, it was a conversation on Facebook, and she was saying, I would rather receive a real honest person than deal with a lot of fakers. Well, is it really being a fake, right? I was not a good public speaker. I could go on stage and work with written materials where I know exactly what my dialogue is going to be, what my partner is going to tell me. I also know a specific reaction that my partner is trying to evoke from me and me from them and us from the audience. I know exactly how this is going to end. And therefore, I have no problem to be in front of 500 people or whatever number of people because every step is scripted,
Mm.
practiced, and learned.
Mm.
And it's not, I'm not the same person on stage, but this is the profession that they choose. And that
Mm.
requires transformation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I should go into a different profession where no one is going to see me and I don't really need to make all this effort, which is an effort. It's a
Yeah.
difficult exercise. So that's one thing. Another thing, you want to work in a corporate environment. This is an environment. So when you go to an environment, it's a culture. It's a culture. So if you want to be a part of this culture, you have to understand how to speak in this culture. If you move to Japan or to China, you learn the culture, right?
Yeah.
So this is a subculture, right? It's not exactly as the background, the nationality, the language, but it has its own rules and regulations. And they're based on what's convenient for everyone to create a comfortable environment for everyone. And yes,
Yeah.
it's a bit bland. And yes, it could be a little bit different from who you really are. But then you have outside of this culture to be anything you want to be, acceptable by social norms.
There's a cost we have to give
Yeah.
to operate in certain areas.
And when you were talking about the difficulty, right? If we're playing basketball, then we all have to operate on the same rules. Otherwise, the game's not going to be played, right? If we're playing football, same thing. And so basically, like you're saying, when you allow yourself to be put in that environment, you are saying, I'm okay playing by these rules, right? And I think that's a really, really good point because I think some people, maybe not everybody, but some people are saying, like, this is who I am. And if people can't deal with that, then they'll just have to deal with that. And in linguistics, they call it noise, which is a normal word that we say for noise, but noise meaning like it interrupts communication. And that could be anything. It could be the fact that I don't have any facial expression whatsoever the whole time. That could be distracting from that conversation that you're trying to have. And so I love that. I think you're exactly right. You are absolutely going into a new environment, into a subculture, and you have to at least be aware of that.
And it's a relationship, right? It's a relationship. It's the relationship you build. Like, for example, I went to school here studying acting. I went to really great school in WaiGuo. I was so proud that they took me, they accepted me. And then once I started speaking English and I felt like so validated, so validated. I was like, I won an Oscar. But then going through school and starting to learn English and being able to communicate, I realized, oh, damn. I will always have an accent. And anywhere else, it's not a problem. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing, amazing country. So you could be anything you want to be. However, this is part of who you are. The same thing as you said, well, I'm not very engaging, right? I don't provide like facial expression and emotion and so forth. So I have this. I could work on it and reduce it a little bit. I wouldn't be able to get rid of it at the age that I came here. I wouldn't be able to remove it at all. So that's another thing when people say, oh, I want to speak like a native. Speak well. That's an attainable goal. And so I chose a different route. I decided to leave and I thought, okay, let's just assess the situation. I'm going to spend this much money. They suggested that I go to graduate school. This is how I learned that, oh, I can go to graduate school. My God, what a great country. And then I realized, like, it's hard to get a full-time job to begin with this kind of profession, let alone when you have the specific things about you that kind of type box you. And there is nothing you could do about it. So I sat down, I made a decision, and I went and I got my MBA. I'm very happy I did that. Sometimes I have a little bit of regret, but that's the reality of things, right?
I don't know anybody that actually somewhat second guesses their degree from time to time.
Yeah, it's like buyer's remorse.
It's kind of like buyer's remorse, yeah.
Being an immigrant, you're restarting your life. You're
Absolutely.
restarting your life as an adult. It's not an easy thing. You have to be prepared for it.
You have to be prepared. You have to make these priorities as well, because everything comes at you with urgency at the same time. Like, it's easy to throw in that I need to reduce my accent so I'm easier to understand. I'm tired of Americans saying what. And that's painful when you've also got to think about, okay, I need to have the right education for me to be able to get a job, or the job that I want to support my family if I have one, or to start a family if you want one here. And then you've got all the immigration paperwork. It's just too much. And so there's a prioritization also, and then you're learning the language while you're here as well. It's very difficult to juggle everything.
It's doing triage with your language.
It's doing triage with your language. And that's where I think for what you do with your teaching this paralanguage and body language and the voice, it's super important, because that is just as important as the words you're speaking in English. Like, you can get very far with a very small vocabulary in English if you can communicate well with the rest of you. You can make yourself more efficient with a smaller vocabulary, in a sense.
Have you been able to work with people maybe from the beginning, like she was just saying, that maybe they're a beginner or just low intermediate, the English isn't very good, but you work with their voice first and foremost, and then you see them grow in that, as opposed to working with, like, corporate professionals that their English has to be at a certain level and you're just kind of tweaking it. Have you worked with both of those groups? And if so, what's the difference in how those students progress?
I don't really do grammar. I can help a little bit with pronunciation of certain things. I don't touch vowels. They still not my friends. But as far as consonants, right? And consonants, very important, because that's where the meaning of the word carries, right? As I said, and we have a lot of similar ones. So I help pronounce those clearly. And especially in the beginning, slow down, pronounce every word. I watched a video about, I don't even remember who the guy was. He was a Russian born, but he came here pre-puberty. And he was talking about that his sister, who's like quite a few years older, she still has this harsh Soviet accent where he had none. And the person who was interviewing him, he said, well, how is that? He said, I would never in a million years think that English was not your first language. And the guy goes, no, it's not. It's Russian. But I came here when I was 8.
Yeah.
It helps.
And therefore, I was able to learn it in the same way as native speaks, and it's not detectable at all. As far as the accent, it's really when you come here, right? When you start learning another language, any language, not just English. With people who don't speak English very well, most of the time I deal with people who are somewhat conversant already. There are people who are very, very, very shy, and you don't really detect their level of English until you help them talk. So I have a lot of different exercises, which is just purely public speaking. We do tongue twisters, and I don't just do it, oh, just let's read it. I tell them to bring a cork. I will not be able to find the cork, but I can do it with a pencil, for example, right? And let's say we practice the word December, and I tell them, okay, what month are we in? December. What month? December. What month? December. Point A to point B, December. And then the second thing is you can take a pencil and create this destruction. Usually we use a wine cork, and it's just at the tip of your teeth. And December, December, December. And try to get the lips connect and b, December. And you do it 5 times, and you'll see the difference, how much easier it gets. December, 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 December. December. And then because they go through the physical obstacle, once you remove it, the body cooperates better to get that sound right. And therefore, you have more energy, you have more voice, you have more pronunciation.
That is a great exercise.
I'm sure everybody feels very silly in class, though, trying to do this.
And that warms people up and makes them feel more comfortable. Another thing is I can ask, what was the question? For example, what's your tip for the best weekend? And then they start talking. And then I always try to pay attention, especially to those who are very shy. I try to find something really great about what they do and how they speak. And sometimes shy people have better structure than the other ones. So he lays his foundation and he brings a couple of points. Like this gentleman was talking about in my class, he was talking about how he gets very tired during the week and he really needs something that is for the mind and for the body. And therefore, he's looking for exercises that combine both. And so he takes his dog, who he loves more than the life itself, and he runs through the park and he really enjoys the nature. And so it's two things. It's the company of the dog. Dog gets exercise, he gets exercise, and he feels like he took care of his pet and he also took care of his body and soul.
Yes.
And it was like, boom, the whole story.
It is interesting. I think the more shy people tend to listen a bit more, or they've spent more time listening. We talk about the silent period in language learning, where children, they don't speak really until around 2 years old, but they babble, they experiment with sounds and things of this nature. But really, most of the linguistic understanding that a child gets is in that first year. And all they're doing is listening and being held and crawling around, right? But it's interesting, we can see it in charts and brain charts. We can see it now, how much language they're really absorbing the sounds most freely and the most openly and laying that groundwork in that first year of absolute silence. And then they start babbling and really practicing different sounds in that second year. And then they start forming words. When I learned that, I was like, yeah, as language learners, we just don't spend enough time listening to start in order to get that structure and to get things to sound right in our head. Once we get to that point where it's like, I know what I just said is wrong because it doesn't sound right. You're learning like a kid in that sense. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head, because very often people who just immigrate, they stay away from English-speaking communities, and therefore they don't get that very important listening skills. They don't get this very important interaction, and they try to avoid it at any cost. Someone told me that when they send the resume, and it's someone who actually had experience already in IT sector, and they send in a resume, people started calling them and they don't pick up the phone.
Wow, that is really sad to miss all that opportunity.
Yeah, obviously your resume catches attention, and then they call you. She's like, I just don't answer the phones. And I said, well, I understand that. I do. I never did that, but I understand.
Right. It's a fear. It's a lack of confidence and a fear. But it's also, I might not understand on the phone.
Yes, that's true too. I remember those times.
How did you push past those times? Like Amber and I call it being a language baby. It's like a very strange place to be as an adult. Even if you have a basic knowledge of the language, you go into that culture and you don't know any significant parts of the culture, right? So you feel out of place, you feel awkward, you feel strange, you feel like you can't express yourself. People are always having to do things for you or cross over some gaps to help you out. It feels awkward. It feels embarrassing. So how did you kind of cross over that threshold when you came here to the States? What really pushed you through that phase of, oh, this is really not easy or comfortable?
The first year, I think I was like that baby. I wasn't really talking much. I was just taking the information. I was very quiet for the first year. And then I went to college. I studied English, and it was tough. I took acting class, and they wouldn't want to sign me up for it. They wouldn't allow me because I didn't speak English. But I said, I want that. And they said, okay. And so I went to the class, but I didn't understand half of the stuff, of the things that we're talking about and instructions sometimes. But I was more experienced than the other kids in terms of acting. And I remember we did an exercise. Every person has to come on the stage at intervals, like every couple of minutes, a new person comes in and they have to bring attention to themselves. But no one said for how long. Right? So when I came in, I can't speak, I can't tell a story, I cannot do anything. So I pretended that I was a woman in labor. And that definitely attracts a lot of attention, makes a lot of noise. And so they put me on a bed made of chairs, and new people come in, And my understanding was that the goal was to keep attention on yourself. Whenever a person comes in, I give them a second and then they take it back. And so the instructor was so angry with me, and he's telling me something, and I'm thinking, I don't freaking understand what you're saying. I thought they did everything perfectly. And he said, Tatyana, that was very selfish. And that I understood. And I was very offended. And I said, why? So he explained to me, you have to let other people to go through the exercise. And I said, didn't say, you mistake. You didn't say, you didn't specify the parameters. And so it definitely helped the interaction, because right away you're in class with people who you have to interact with. And I knew that would work, but it definitely wasn't enough. And then it worked. My very first job, I would just write scripts.
Yes.
I was write scripts. So people would call for my boss. They took me more for my Russian language because they work with Eastern Europe a lot. And they need someone to be able to talk to those people, which is a whole different ball game and different communication style and stuff. So that was my value. But in the meantime, there was an American part of it where people call, they leave messages, they ask for emails, they leave messages was the worst. Not only I didn't understand what they were saying, I couldn't write it down.
Yes.
So I came up with an idea. Oh, like my boss, Robert, is not in town right now. He's traveling. However, I can give you his email and you can copy me and send him an email, and I will make sure that he responds.
Yes. Perfect.
So this way I don't have to memorize anything. It's straight into his email. I can remind him about this email. And that's what I did. Another thing was we had an international office where we would receive a lot of phone calls from all over the world. And my American counterparts, we had a girl who was a paralegal. She hated accents, not in a bad way. She just couldn't. So she calls me and she said, hey, Tatyana, can you come here? And I'm like, my God, what does she want from me? I don't speak English. I don't understand what she would ask. I can't help her with anything. Why is she bothering me? And I go, yes. And she said, do you speak French? And I was like, no, I speak Russian. Well, isn't it like French? I was like, not at all. And she was like, you're better at understanding them than me. So she puts the French office, and there was a French law firm, she put them on the speaker. So I can understand, but I can't write it down because my spelling sucked. So I said, take notes. And so together we were able to cook the message that we could transfer to someone. And that kind of gives you validation, because you see someone in front of you that can't really co-op with certain things. I was like, oh, that's how I feel most of the time.
We all face it to some degree. Anybody that steps outside of their comfort zone is going to face that to some degree. And so it's encouraging for you to have received that earlier, seeing other people struggle. That had to have been a huge boost, because that's super helpful.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they think of like fluency, I think they're thinking a lot of times of like a score, or maybe like even a job that they got or something through some sort of English door. But like what you just said right there, I think is like a really good case of like, hey, we did it. Like, true, my English wasn't perfect. True, there was maybe some mistakes, but communication was established. Like, meaning was communicated. We got the call, we sent that email, and it came back in a positive way. And it wasn't, what? I mean, maybe there was some whats, but we worked through that and communication was done. It is probably a weird example. I think of a British actor, which we know as Mr. Bean. I don't know if you've ever seen
I know
this,
him, of course.
but
Atkins.
it's awesome because it's a perfect example of paralanguage, because he doesn't say a word in hardly any of his movies. He's doing all these crazy paralanguage. Obviously, they're over the top. Everybody would recognize that. But communication is being established, and people don't have to know a language at all. When we lived in China, people knew exactly what Mr. Bean was saying, even though he wasn't saying any comprehensible words. And so for me, that's the thing that I think is like, it's just a perfect example of like, if your goal is communication, you at least have to have this paralanguage, this voice, this body language attached to something, because I mean, it does a lot.
It can be a source of confidence.
It can be a
source of effective communication, but it's missing on the phone, and it's very difficult over Zoom, and that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge. But again, that paralanguage, bigger on screen helps. That projecting the voice needs to happen to some degree, even more so maybe on Zoom. You don't want to be screaming into the microphone, but projecting that point A to point B you were talking about. It's like there's a point A, point 5 in the middle there.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get through, but it's
You know
doable.
what? We connect on emotion. Why Mr. Bean was so successful? Because he communicates pure emotion.
Yeah.
And energy, another thing, like instead of like maybe some people are not comfortable with emotions, okay, fine. Came across that as well. But like energy, you can come in and just say, oh, hi Amber, hi Josh, really good to see you. Or you can come in and say, Amber, hi, how are you? Josh, great to see you guys, right? And it changes everything.
And that way, working with children for a time in your life at some point is a gift, because you really have to do that. The kids pick up on it innately and they will exploit it. They will take advantage of whatever you are communicating in a way. But that's one of the things that I found that helped as a communicator, was actually working with a group of kids that were not my own, having to work with them and just connect that energy with all of them, whether they could speak or not. A range of ages was great in my case. It was very difficult, but I could not be laid back. I could not slump down to communicate with them. You cannot do that with kids. They will take total advantage of you as a teacher. It's very helpful in that way. But you're right. The way that you present yourself very much brings energy and controls or kicks off that conversation.
One of my last questions for you, Tatyana, is as you have progressed from, acting to MBA to what you're doing now, what would you say has been like a new maybe challenge for you as an educator, as a voice educator, as a person that's trying to get people to do interviews better? Maybe, I don't know, with like this post-COVID world that we live in now, or this Zoom-filled world that we live in now, what is something that here recently you feel like has changed in the way that you try and teach people how to have that body language, like in corporate realm or something like that?
For multicultural, it's really the awareness. Even for myself, it's easier for me to find common grounds, let's say about Russians, right? Or all the post-Russian space. It's easier for me to find common grounds with people who work in corporate. They adjust faster because they're required to. They communicate clearer. They communicate more precise, plus, minus, and they get it. They get it. It's kind of like relaxes you. It's a bit different with people who are not exposed to corporate world, and therefore their integration is a little bit less. So what is difficult? It's really the awareness. It's really the awareness. Before, like I came here in 91, I was relatively young. I was still going to college and stuff. And most of the people I know from those times, they're people I met through college, they're people I met through work. So that's a certain environment too. Yeah. When I started teaching at IT school, first of all, they're much younger. They're like 20 years younger in some cases, 20 to 15. And it's different generation, and they don't have this cultural awareness, that they have the corporate awareness. And so just to understanding the level of this lack of awareness, do we speak the same language? Do we understand each other? So I always make sure that we understand why we're doing what we're doing, why we're learning what we're learning, and do you understand where the difference is?
That's true with native speakers as well. Native speakers to native speakers. As teachers, like, you have to establish that we are all on the same page in why we're doing it, when we're doing it, how we're going to do it, what is the way we're going to communicate to make sure this continues going well. You have to lay that groundwork now. There's a huge gap in the generations for sure.
That's why I love when you first started telling us your story and your language learning journey. The thing that I loved the most about it is that whether it's to a native speaker or a non-native speaker, the things that you are trying to get people to understand is largely the same. Like, communication requires more than just the words being spoken themselves. And so for me, when you first were talking, I was just like, man, this lady's got it. Like, it doesn't happen a lot because I think most people are so worried about the what that they're going to say, the content, that they kind of defocus and just devalue the how they're going to say it. And from the very beginning, when you were talking about your journey, I was just like, man, this is good, even for native speakers, because there's a lot of native English speakers that we know that make make the same mistakes. They can't do an interview well. They don't know how to project their voice. They don't know how to kind of handle the physical space or the virtual space well. And to me, I'm just like, that's so needed. It is a necessary skill that we need, even as native and non-native English speakers, to communicate in this world that we live in.
Ultimately, how you communicate is content as well. It's content of what you're saying as well.
The manner in which you communicate.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So Tatyana, where can people find you if they want to work with you, if they want to get that practice of being able to kind of hold themselves, especially in an interview, well, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram, Tatyana Ganeli, the Art of Voice Coach.
And for everyone else, if you look in the YouTube description below, you can definitely find a link that through that you can find her.
It's a challenge.
Guys, thank you. Thank you so very much for this conversation. And your questions were so incredible because it made me rethink a lot of things. And this is some of the things I didn't even think about. And it's important to actually feel it, right? And understand it fully. So thank you so much for your questions. Very thorough.
Yeah,
very much. Thank you so much for your expertise, sharing your expertise here. It's going to be super helpful to so many people.
Invaluable.
Absolutely.
Really.